I didn't really realize how much I missed watching movies like this until I started doing it again. And I don't just mean watching movies, I've always watched movies. I mean watching them on purpose. Sitting down, choosing something that wasn't algorithmically lobbed at me, wasn't part of a release week discourse spiral. Just picking a movie, pressing play, and actually paying attention like a freak. At the beginning of this year, I stumbled across something called the Criterion Challenge, created by a Letterboxd user named Ben, who, whether he realizes it or not, is responsible for a significant portion of my free time in 2025. The premise is simple and slightly unhinged: 52 weeks, 52 films, all from the Criterion collection, each week tied to a specific prompt. A film from the 1940s, a Japanese film, a documentary, a movie that you'd grabbed first in the Criterion closet. Normal, low commitment stuff. And when I saw this challenge, something in my brain immediately lit up. Because the truth is, I used to be that guy, the buckled down cinephile, the guy working his way through entire filmographies and movements and eras, the guy who got weirdly excited about new restorations, director's cuts, or the phrase new 4K transfer. Somewhere along the way, between work, life, exhaustion, and the general background noise of just being an adult, that version of me got a little bit buried. I was still watching movies, but it was different. Comfort rewatches, new releases, stuff I could throw on while half scrolling on my phone and pretending I was still engaging. And there's nothing wrong with that. Well, maybe there is, but I realized I wasn't really exploring anymore. I wasn't challenging my taste. I wasn't discovering things that made me stop and rethink what I liked or why I liked it or whether I actually liked it at all. So I jumped into the Criterion Challenge almost immediately without thinking too hard about it, which in retrospect might be the only psychologically safe way to agree to watch 52 Criterion movies in a single year. And now I'm here at the end of it. Over the course of this year, I watched films from all over the world, spanning more than a century of cinema: silent films, 3.5 hour epics, tiny character studies, documentaries that scrambled my brain, movies I fell completely in love with, movies that bored me to tears, movies I respected more than I enjoyed. And what ended up being meaningful about this wasn't just the movies themselves, it was what the process revealed to me, about my relationship with cinema now, about how my taste has changed, about what I'm more drawn to at this point in my life, about what I have far less patience for than I used to, and about how powerful it can be to give yourself to a structure that forces you to meet art on its own terms instead of yours. So this video isn't a ranked list of all 52 films. It's not a definitive recap either. It's really just me looking back on 2025, talking about the movies that floored me, the ones that surprised me, the ones that didn't work, and the unexpected ways that this Criterion Challenge helped me reconnect with why I love movies in the first place. One of the biggest things the Criterion Challenge gave me, maybe the biggest, was structure. And I don't mean structure in a rigid, homeworky way. I mean that it gave me a reason to sit down and watch something that I might not have picked on my own and then actually finish it. And look, I know that sounds incredibly basic, but I think a lot of us are in the same boat right now. We live in an era where everything is available all the time, which somehow makes choosing anything feel impossible sometimes. I can scroll for 15 minutes on Netflix, add 3 movies to my watch list, and then rewatch the same episode of The West Wing or something else that I've already seen because it's easier. The Criterion Challenge short-circuited that impulse. The movie was already chosen, the box was already checked. All I had to do was press play and commit. And that commitment mattered. Now look, Criterion as a brand has always represented something slightly aspirational to me. It's not just a library, it's sort of a philosophy. There's a reason that their closet videos have taken over the internet and film Twitter and Instagram. Watching filmmakers and actors light up while pulling titles off a shelf isn't just charming, it's a reminder that movies aren't content, they're artifacts, they're conversations across time. And so going through this challenge gave me a real sense of the scale of global cinema, how many voices, perspectives, and histories are wrapped up in this medium. Watching films from the 1920s one week and then the 2020s the next really collapses time in a strange way. You start noticing how ideas echo, how themes repeat, how some problems like immigration or labor or family or love or power never actually go away. They just get recontextualized. A movie like Alambrista, for example, felt shockingly current, like it could have been released last year, dropped into the discourse, and immediately sparked think pieces and bad tweets. And that happened over and over again throughout the year. It also forced me to confront something that I don't always love admitting, that not every quote unquote important movie is going to work for me. And that's okay. There were weeks where I finished a film and thought, all right, yeah, I get why this matters. I respect it. I do not want to spend any more time with it, but yeah, I respect it. And there were other weeks where something I barely knew anything about completely rearranged my brain. The challenge didn't just expand my taste, it clarified it. Because I started recognizing patterns, what I gravitate toward now versus what I used to gravitate toward, when patience feels rewarding and when it feels kind of punishing, when formal experimentation excites me, and when it feels like homework. It made me more honest with myself as a viewer, which is something that I think gets lost when we feel pressure to like the right movie for the right reasons. And more than anything, this year reminded me that watching movies, really watching them, is kind of a skill and one that gets rusty if you don't use it. And once that muscle came back online, everything else followed. So let's talk about some movies from the 52 that completely knocked me over. There were a handful of films during this challenge that didn't just impress me or earn my respect, they kind of flattened me. The kind of movies where you finish them and you just sit there for a minute, staring at the screen, thinking, oh, right, this is why people get annoying about movies. And what surprised me most was how many of those came from eras that I used to think of as homework. Take Yasujiro Ozu's Tokyo Story, for example, probably the clearest example. I went into it braced for something slow, the version of important cinema that you admire more than you feel, and then it just wrecked me. It's a movie that sneaks up on you, it waits until you're comfortable, and then it hits you with this devastating clarity about aging, family, and time slipping through your fingers while you're busy answering emails. It genuinely made me want to call my parents. Like immediately. That's a powerful thing for a movie from 1953 to do. Charlie Chaplin's The Kid did something similar. I was laughing one minute and actively fighting back tears the next. Chaplin's physical comedy still works on the most primal level. It bypasses taste, it bypasses irony, bypasses everything. You don't need to get the joke. Your body just reacts. And then suddenly, the movie pivots and reminds you that it's also about poverty, about separation, about how fragile family can be. And Jackie Coogan is unbelievable in this, and the tenderness between him and Chaplin feels so pure it almost catches you off guard. It's wild how emotionally modern it feels. And then there's Seven Samurai. This one has such forward momentum, especially in its back half, that it barely registers as long, even though it's 3.5 hours long. It's chaotic, it's muddy, it's loud. At times it's funny, it's tragic, all at once. The Red Shoes also knocked me over in a different way, pure cinematic intoxication. The color, the music, the obsession. It's a movie about art consuming the people who make it, and it doesn't just say it, it embodies it. And one that I watched early on, Farewell My Concubine, I don't even know how to neatly talk about this film. It spans decades, lives, political upheaval, personal betrayal. It's intimate and epic at the same time, and it somehow makes both feel equally essential. By the end, it felt less like I'd watched a movie and more like I'd lived alongside these characters for years. What all of these films had in common wasn't their era or their style, it was their humanity. They were deeply, sincerely invested in people, their desires, their regrets, and their contradictions. Now, if this video has a single turning point, the moment where the Criterion Challenge stopped being a project and turned into something closer to an obsession, it's Juzo Itami. Now, I had not seen Tampopo before this year. It was one of those movies I had been hearing people rave about forever, the kind of film that slowly migrates into your mental category of, I'll get to it eventually. And the Criterion Challenge finally gave me that push to stop circling it and actually press play. And almost immediately, I got it. It clicked. Tampopo is playful, it's generous, it's deeply weird, and somehow incredibly sincere. It's about food, community, mentorship, obsession, all wrapped up in this formally loose, joyful structure. I loved the hell out of it, but more importantly, it made me curious about the person who made it, the person at the helm. It didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like the work of someone with a very specific way of looking at the world. So I kept going. Regular frequenters of this channel will probably remember that I put out a whole video about Juzo Itami because I watched Tampopo for the Criterion Challenge. The Funeral was the next one, And that's when things really locked in. This one is so dry, so precise, so brutal in the way it observes social behavior. It's about death, yes, but it's really about politeness, obligation, about the sheer terror of not knowing how you're supposed to act. I finished it and immediately wanted to watch another Itami film, not later, not someday, immediately. And then that became a pattern. A Taxing Woman and its sequel, A Taxing Woman's Return, completely blew me away. And then Supermarket Woman might be the warmest film in his filmography. It's optimistic without being corny, it's idealistic without being naive. And Minbo, which is Itami at his most confrontational, a movie about Yakuza extortion that's also a comedy about collective problem solving. Then there's Tales of a Golden Geisha, A Quiet Life, The Last Dance, Woman in Witness Protection. What connected all of these films for me was Itami's worldview. He's endlessly fascinated by systems, cultural, economic, social, and how regular people navigate them. His films are funny, but they're also humane. They trust the audience, they trust intelligence, and they ooze curiosity. And here's the thing, none of this would have happened without the Criterion Challenge. Tampopo would have just stayed a someday movie, but instead, Itami became one of the defining discoveries of my year. I was genuinely dreading the moment that I'd run out of his films, that very specific sadness that you feel when you realize there are no more first time watches left. That kind of discovery feels rare as an adult. Maybe you could feel it too. And it's maybe the best argument that I can make for the Criterion Challenge. Now, how about some of the films that snuck up on me this year? One of the nicest surprises of the Criterion Challenge was how often a movie I knew almost nothing about ended up being the one that I couldn't stop thinking about. Not the big canon titles, not the ones I'd been saving, just movies I sort of stumbled into and then slowly realized had gotten their hooks into me. For instance, a film that I mentioned already, Alambrista, is the perfect example. And the way that I picked it makes it even funnier. One of the prompts for the challenge is to choose a random spine number. No strategy, just chaos. So I used a random number generator and it spit out a number, and that number happened to be Alambrista. I pressed play. I remember where I was. Not exactly. I was in a hotel room at work. I pressed play knowing basically nothing. And then about halfway through, I had that uncomfortable realization of, oh, this movie could have been made yesterday. The Thief of Baghdad was another one that I didn't expect to fall for. I assumed it would be something that I respected more than I enjoyed. Sort of like, yeah, this is impressive for its time kind of watch. But instead, I was completely locked in. David Lean's Summertime was a much more subtle surprise. It's not flashy, it's not loud, it doesn't beg for your attention. It just slowly unfolds into this very adult story about loneliness, romance, and the difference between fantasy and reality. And Black Girl, that one hit me hard. It's pretty short, it's direct, and it doesn't waste a second. It's just a steadily tightening sense of discomfort that never really lets you off the hook. I finished it and just kind of sat there staring at the screen, trying to recalibrate. Okay, but of course, there were films that I watched this year that didn't work for me. One thing that I want to be really clear about before I start naming names is that none of these movies are bad. That's not what this is. This is more about expectations and the very specific disappointment that comes from finally sitting down with a film that you've heard people rave about for years and realizing, oh, okay, I guess this one just isn't for me, at least not right now. That happened more than I expected this year. Mike Leigh's Secrets and Lies was a big one. On paper, it's absolutely something I should love, and I respected it. I really did, but it never fully clicked for me in a way that I hoped it would. Gus Van Sant's Drugstore Cowboy was another. I liked moments of it, and there's a looseness to it that I appreciated, but overall, it didn't quite live up to that version that I built in my head. That's always the risk with long-standing blind spots. Sometimes you imagine a movie is better than the real one. But also, I gotta say that Gus Van Sant made up for it because I watched To Die For this year as well, and that film is incredible. Michael Haneke's The Seventh Continent fits pretty squarely here too, a film that I absolutely would have eaten up at a different time in my life, but now it's landing more as an exercise in endurance than something emotionally resonant for me. With the Eric Romer film Claire's Knee, I had a very specific Romer reaction where I understood exactly what the movie was doing, I understood why people love it, and still felt weirdly disconnected from it. I admired the talk, the moral games, the precision, but it never really pulled me in. And then there's Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, which might be the most controversial inclusion on the list. And I get it. I understand the craft. Every frame looks like a painting. And yet, watching it, I felt more impressed than engaged. It's a movie I respect enormously, but one that I admire from a distance rather than love. Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock left me similarly conflicted. The atmosphere is incredible, the mystery is haunting, but instead of feeling hypnotized, I found myself slightly frustrated. Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs was tough in a different way. It's confrontational by design, and I recognize its place in the canon, but engaging with it now felt more exhausting than illuminating. And then there are the wild cards, The Others and House, both fascinating, both memorable in their own right, but neither fully worked for me in a way that I expected. House, especially, is a movie I admired more than I enjoyed, which feels almost sacrilegious to admit to all of you. What all of these had in common wasn't slowness or difficulty. I had no issue with long run times or sleepy pacing elsewhere in the challenge. Just look at Cure or Beau Travail. The through line was distance. These were films where I felt myself hovering just outside the emotional core, appreciating them intellectually without ever fully sinking in. And honestly, that realization was useful. It helped me understand what I'm less drawn to now. Not difficulty, not ambition, but emotional withholding. I still want movies to challenge me. I just want them to meet me somewhere human while they're doing it. And that clarity ended up being one of the most valuable takeaways of the entire challenge. When I try to think back on the Criterion Challenge in 2025 now, the memories don't line up neatly by theme or decade or spine number. They blur together in a way that feels more like how you remember a year of your life rather than a checklist that you completed. Certain images stick in my brain, certain feelings stick in my heart, certain movies just kind of linger in the room with you long after you finish them. And the weirder stuff left a mark too. F for Fake felt like a magic trick that I was happy to fall for. Heart of a Dog and The Man Who Fell to Earth felt like bold declarations that I admired from a distance. Beau Travail got under my skin in a way that surprised me. It's slow and it's poetic and it's restrained and somehow more emotionally direct than something like Kurosawa's Dreams, despite being far less explicit. Even the crime films became part of this ongoing internal conversation. The Friends of Eddie Coyle had my pulse racing in a way that The Killing of a Chinese Bookie just didn't. And then there were the movies that reflected something back at me personally. Wildlife felt uncomfortably recognizable in a way that lingered longer than Joachim Trier's The Worst Person in the World, a film that I admired but didn't quite internalize. Le Corbeau made me feel uneasy in the best way. Diabolique felt airtight and cruel and deliciously mean. La Vérité was messier, more exhausting, and emotionally bruising in a way that stuck with me longer than I expected. Taken together, Henri Georges Clouzot's films felt like getting temporarily trapped inside a very specific, very cynical brain, and I loved every second of it. Brian De Palma's Sisters was sweaty and paranoid and way more chaotic than I was ready for. Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure was slowed down and patient and oddly poisonous, the kind of movie that doesn't scare you so much as it just unsettles your nervous system. Double Indemnity was pure pleasure, sharp dialogue, fatalistic romance, and the sudden realization that Billy Wilder might be a problem for me going forward, a problem in a good way. Jim Jarmusch's Ghost Dog felt like a Hitman movie made by someone who didn't care about Hitman movies, and I mean that complimentary. Then there are these smaller, more personal ones. The Day Trippers felt like spending a day with people who were funny and annoying and painfully recognizable. Sean Baker's Takeout was so observational and restrained, it almost disappears while you're watching it, and then you just realize that it wrecked you at the end. When I look at all of this together, I see context. I see a year of learning what actually pulls me in versus what keeps me at arm's length. It turns out my taste isn't about whether a movie is slow or fast or old or new or restrained or experimental. It's about whether the film feels curious about people or more interested in making a point. The Criterion Challenge didn't give me a definitive ranking of cinema. It gave me something better, a year of lived experiences with movies, a collection of moments, surprises, frustrations, obsessions, and connections that now all exist in conversation with one another. And honestly, that feels like the best possible outcome. So, would I recommend the Criterion Challenge to any of you out there who didn't participate this year? Yeah, I really would, with a few caveats. I would not recommend it if you're looking for a year of only great vibes. You're gonna watch things that don't work for you. You're gonna have weeks where the movie feels like homework. You're gonna sit through something that everyone else loves and think, okay, I guess that just isn't my thing. And that could be uncomfortable, especially if you're used to curating your own watch list very carefully. But that discomfort is kind of the point. The challenge forces you out of your habits. It removes the safety net of choice. Some weeks you stumble into a movie you never would have picked, like Alambrista, and it'll somehow become one of the most meaningful watches of your year. Other weeks you'll finally cross off the canon title that you've been circling forever and realize that your relationship to it just isn't what you expected. Both of those experiences matter. I also think this challenge works best if you let go of the idea that it's a test. You don't get extra credit for loving everything. You don't fail if a movie doesn't click with you. The real value is in paying attention to the film and to your own reactions. The more honest you are about that, the more rewarding the whole thing becomes. And when I do it again, and I make my list for the 2026 challenge in just a few weeks, I might tweak a few things. Maybe I'll leave more space between heavy watches. I kind of piled on too many in the back half, and it got to be a chore. I might be less precious about finishing something on a specific week if life just gets in the way. Maybe I'll even avoid doubling up on filmmakers like I did with Clouseau and Kurosawa and Gus Van Sant, just to allow even more diversity in the selections. But overall, I wouldn't change the experience itself, because at the end of the year, what I'm left with isn't just a list of 52 movies that I watched. It's a year of memories, of sitting with films that I loved, films that I resisted, films that surprised me, and films that clarified what I care about now as a viewer. It reconnected me with watching movies as an active, intentional act, not just something to fill time. And honestly, if a challenge can do that, it's doing something right. Thank you all so much for sticking with me this year. This is the penultimate video of 2025 here on the Cinema Wellness channel. I have one more where I rank my favorite new releases of 2025, so I hope you stick around for that. I'll see you in the new year, where I'll quickly be compiling my 2026 Criterion challenge. Let me know what you think I should watch down in the comments for my challenge in 2026. I hope you will join me this time around. When you're done with that, don't forget to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on this channel. And then head over to my Letterboxd where you can see what I'm watching, when I'm watching it. And I'm gonna go get some tea because my throat is killing me. I've been talking for hours now, and I'll see you all next time.